Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take these massive, sprawling stories, get into all the incredible lore, and give you the kind of surgical analysis you need to really get what's going on beneath the surface.
And today, we are locking the door and throwing away the key on one of the most successful, and I mean, one of the most bewilderingly complex horror franchises in film history.
We are talking about Saw.
Exactly.
The Jigsaw killer.
The one and only. And look, this franchise took a tiny $1 million concept and somehow turned it into a global machine that's made well over $1 billion.
That is just a crazy number for a series that, let's be honest, probably should have run out of gas about 5 movies ago.
It should have.
And our sources for this deep dive really map out that whole improbable journey. We're going from a simple short film made by 2 ambitious Australian filmmakers, James Wan and Leigh Whannell, all the way to the convoluted saga we have today.
Which is now getting this huge creative refresh under Blumhouse, with Wan himself actually coming back.
Which is huge. So our mission today is pretty specific. We want to dissect how Saw went from that one single claustrophobic location,
The bathroom.
infamous bathroom, right, and how it became this multi-generational legacy. We're going to focus on the evolution of John Kramer, the really crucial roles of his apprentices who were often betraying each other.
All the time.
And how the series basically weaponized its non-linear timeline. It became part of the puzzle. We'll also dig into the market realities that force the later movies to just keep experimenting. Reboots, spin-offs, anything to stay alive.
It is, I mean, it's a masterclass in turning your low-budget problems into a strength, into a mythology. But to really get it, you have to go all the way back to the beginning.
Back when it was just 2 friends and, what, $5,000?
Pretty much.
Okay, let's get into it.
The story of how Saw got started is, I mean, it's the perfect indie filmmaker success story. This franchise that everyone now connects with, you know, tons of gore. It started as a purely high-concept, low-budget idea back in the mid to late 90s.
And the sources are pretty clear that the director, James Wan, and the writer, Leigh Whannell, who also acted in it, they were film school grads in Australia, and they were looking at what was happening in independent film at the time.
Right. They were inspired by movies that used almost no resources, but created this incredible psychological tension.
They specifically point to the Blair Witch Project,
Of course.
which proved you could make millions on a shoestring budget if you created a cool new mythology. And also Darren Aronofsky's, that dark conceptual thriller, Pi.
Exactly. And their main idea was just brilliant because of how simple it was. It was
Yeah.
totally driven by the fact that they had no money.
So 2 actors, chained up, in one single rundown room.
The bathroom,
Uh-huh.
with a dead body right there between them. The whole point was supposed to be the dialogue, the mystery, and this big ethical question.
How far would you go to survive?
That was it. And that whole aesthetic, which was, you know, purely a choice to save money, ended up becoming the signature look for the entire franchise.
But even with a killer idea, it took them years. They couldn't get funding in Australia between 2001, 2002. They optioned the script once, but the deal just fell apart.
Yeah, it took their agent, Stacey Testro, really pushing them, telling them, look, you have to take this thing to Hollywood, go to LA, that's your only shot.
And that's what leads to the real turning point, the short film.
Right, what we now call Saw Point 5. This was everything. Whannell and Wan, they pooled their own money. I think Whannell put in about $5,000 just to shoot one single scene from their script.
And they shot it on 16mm film.
They did. And the scene they chose was the reverse bear trap, with Whannell himself playing the victim, David.
Okay, let's just pause on that. $5,000 to basically create a proof of concept for a $1 billion franchise. The guts to pick that one. Super visceral, high-stakes moment.
With the ticking clock, the mechanical tension.
Yeah, it wasn't just some artsy short film. It was a pitch deck, but delivered as, you know, pure horror footage.
It worked instantly. They showed that 3-minute reel to the producers, who would go on to form Twisted Pictures. Greg Hoffman, Mark Berg, and Orrin Cools. Hoffman said his jaw just dropped 2 minutes in.
Because it wasn't just scary, it proved they could create this huge visual impact and suspense with almost no money.
And the deal they got is so interesting from a business perspective. They got creative control and 25% of the net profits, but for a tiny budget of only $1 to $1.2 million.
And that's key, because our sources say they got better offers from big studios. DreamWorks was one of them. Gold Circle Films.
Oh, yeah. But they chose the smaller deal, the lower budget. specifically to keep that creative control. They were adamant that Wan had to direct and Wannell had to star. They had to protect their vision of it being this tight, character-driven mystery.
They knew a bigger studio might just force them to add more gore or change that amazing ending.
Exactly. So by keeping the budget small, they kept all the power.
And that first movie from 2004 was filmed in, what, 18 days?
A blistering 18 days, yeah. Mostly inside one warehouse in L.A. Which brings us to this fundamental tension that really defines the whole series. What the first film was trying to be versus what people think it is now.
Because the 2004 original was not a gore fest. Not really.
Not at all. With that tiny budget, a lot of the violence, like the famous foot-cutting scene, it was mostly implied, or it happened so fast you barely saw it. The film was really a mystery thriller. It was all about the conversation between Adam and Dr. Gordon, figuring out the plot, and the ethical message Jigsaw was trying to send.
It really did pose a genuine moral question, didn't it? The victims weren't just, evil cartoon characters.
No, they were morally gray. A voyeuristic photographer, the doctor who's cheating on his wife, a drug addict. People who had just failed to appreciate their own lives.
Yeah.
The film kind of asks, are they bad people or just people caught in bad circumstances?
And it never really gives you a straight answer.
That ambiguity was central to what Wan and Wannell wanted to do.
Right.
But the franchise and where it went next, that's what changed how we see that first movie.
Because the sequels just dramatically ramped up the gore and the complexity of the traps.
And they became these annual Halloween events, right? So the whole series got lumped in with the torture porn subgenre, which is a label the creators really pushed back on at first.
So was that shift to more gore just a commercial decision? Like, this is what the audience wants, so let's give it to them? Or did they try to justify it within Jigsaw's world?
A little of both, I think. Commercially, they saw pretty fast that the big trap reveals and the audience's visceral reaction to the gore, that's what was selling tickets. Philosophically, they explained it in the lore by saying Kramer was perfecting his methods.
Or later, that the apprentices were escalating the violence beyond what he intended.
But the marketing was always about the spectacle of the traps.
But the cinematic footprint of that first film is just huge, especially in two big ways. First, serialization and the narrative structure.
Saw really popularized this incredibly complex, episodic way of telling a story. It rewarded you for having like an encyclopedic knowledge of the earlier movies. It created this out-of-order jigsaw puzzle.
And that structure is everywhere now. Our sources point out it influenced modern serialized TV and movies way beyond just horror. You mentioned Marvel movies.
It's a perfect comparison.
Saw basically trained audiences to look for clues, to rewatch films, to expect that some random character from 3 movies ago is suddenly the key to everything.
It validated the deep dive fandom. If you paid attention and followed the crazy lore of Kramer's plans, you felt so rewarded when the final twist revealed some hidden scheme from years ago. It made watching an order a necessity, not an option.
And then second, its influence on genre and set design is massive. The fact that they used one single location to save money showed the whole industry that you could make infinite profit from a contained setting.
And the focus on those detailed mechanical death games directly gave birth to an entire subgenre. You can see its DNA all over the escape room horror movies.
Like The Collector or the Escape Room franchise.
Exactly. Saw wrote the rules. The environment is your enemy, survival demands a painful sacrifice, and some disembodied voice lays out the ethical test. The rules themselves are almost a character.
And then, of course, the granddaddy of all horror twists, the corpse in the middle of the room just stands up.
Reveals he's Jigsaw. It's a masterclass in misdirection, one of the greatest reveals ever, and it forced you to immediately rethink everything you just saw. It set the standard that every single Saw movie had to end with a shocking reality-bending twist.
Okay, so with those origins set, we have to pivot to the architect of this whole billion-dollar universe, John Kramer himself. We need to look at how the lore builds him up, not just as some random psychopath, but as this brilliant, deeply broken man whose entire philosophy and mechanical genius is the foundation for everything.
And what's so fascinating is how tragic and human his origin story actually is. Before anyone had ever heard the name Jigsaw, John Kramer was a successful civil engineer. He was a toy maker.
Right. He was married to Jill Tuck, who ran a rehab clinic. He wasn't some guy lurking in the shadows. He was a respected professional member of his community.
The whole thing shifts because of 2 just catastrophic events. The first and the most devastating emotionally was losing his unborn son, Gideon.
Jill had a miscarriage after she was injured during a robbery at her clinic. And the robber was one of her own patients, a man named Cecil Adams. That just shattered their world.
And then comes the second blow. John gets diagnosed with aggressive, inoperable colon cancer in January of '95. He felt completely let down by the medical system, by the justice system. He saw a world that was just careless and full of people who didn't appreciate being alive.
His transformation, his real rebirth, comes right after that. He's completely distraught, sees no future, and he tries to kill himself.
He drives his car off a cliff, and he survives. Miraculously, but he's, mangled.
Yeah.
And that near-death experience, instead of humbling him, he gives him this twisted sense of purpose. A rebirth, like you said. He decides he's the only one who can judge the value of life because he survived giving his up.
So he dedicates the time he has left to creating these tests or games. He called it instant rehabilitation. The idea wasn't to just execute people.
In theory, no. The idea was to force people to appreciate the gift of life by making them face certain death.
And his very first victim was the man who started it all.
Cecil Adams. Gamely. Yeah. In February of '95, Cecil is put in the knife chair trap. He fails the test, he dies horribly, and John's new purpose is cemented.
The name, the Jigsaw Killer, is another key piece of the lore, especially because John Kramer himself hated it.
Hated it. It was a media invention. The name came from his signature move, cutting a puzzle piece shaped from the skin of those who failed his tests.
And that wasn't just a grim trophy, it was symbolic.
Deeply symbolic. That missing piece represented their missing survival instinct, that vital part of the human puzzle that Kramer believed they had given up through their selfish actions.
Let's talk about the mechanics, because this is where his background as an engineer really comes into play. What are the hallmarks of Kramer's methods, the tools of the trade that gave the franchise that signature rusty industrial look?
The traps are the star of the show, obviously, and they're all defined by their construction. These deadly mechanical contraptions, often made from rusty, scavenged, repurposed parts. It's not just an aesthetic, it speaks to Kramer's efficiency.
And what's so interesting from the production notes is that these things were built to actually work in real life. They weren't just CGI. The gears had to turn, the blades had to swing.
Right, and the symbolism is never subtle. If a victim was, say, a predatory lender who metaphorically took pounds of flesh from people, their trap would force them to literally cut off chunks of their own body to survive. The punishment always fits the crime, so to speak.
It's the ultimate physical irony. A liar gets their jaw ripped open. Someone who wastes their breath gets put in a room with no air. But the delivery mechanism for all the rules and the philosophy is, of course, the franchise icon.
Billy the puppet.
Billy. The tricycle, the tuxedo, the spiral cheeks. He's instantly recognizable. But his backstory is actually really heartbreaking and so important to understanding Kramer.
It is. Billy was based on an earlier puppet John had made for his and Jill's unborn son, Gideon. So it was this symbol of hope and fatherhood, and after Gideon's death, it gets twisted into this chilling messenger of doom.
The transformation of the puppet is really the transformation of John Kramer.
And as the movie budgets got bigger, the puppet got more advanced. In the first film, it was pretty simple: clay, papier-mâché, ping-pong balls for eyes.
But in the later films, they upgraded it with remote-controlled eyes and a servo-driven mouth. It could be more dynamic, more menacing. It really cemented its role as the herald of the games.
Beyond Billy, his main way of giving instructions was the microcassette recorder. And again, the level of detail here is amazing to get that iconic, distorted, menacing voice.
He spoke into a reel-to-reel recorder and then slowed the playback way, way down. It just shows how meticulous he was. He was always thinking 3 steps ahead of everyone, including the audience. He was even planning from beyond the grave. That key tape, the one coated in wax found inside his stomach during the autopsy in Saw 4.
Literally controlling the game after his own death.
And we can't talk about the identity of this franchise without bringing up the music.
Hello, Zepp?
The theme by Charlie Clouser. It's in the finale of every single movie, right when the big twist is revealed.
It's the sound of the puzzle finally clicking into place. The second you hear that music start to build, you know the game is over, and your whole perception of what just happened is about to be shattered. It's an incredible piece of musical conditioning. It's the sound of inevitable philosophical defeat. #Tag3. The succession crisis and the complex timeline.
Okay, so this is where things get really interesting. The true genius of the Saw franchise is that it kept going for decades after its main character, John Kramer, actually died.
He dies in Saw 3, which came out in 2006. And the way they pulled that off was through Succession, The Apprentices, and by fully embracing this incredibly complex, fractured, non-linear timeline.
Right. This is where we have to slow down and really map things out because the relationships are just as complicated as the traps. Once Kramer was dead, the series had to become less about what's next and more about what happened before. Who was working with him, when, and why.
Exactly right. The whole narrative shifts from being a normal horror sequel to being this historical detective story where you're constantly digging up secrets from the past. So let's start with the first known survivor and apprentice, Amanda Young.
Amanda is so critical. She's played by Shawnee Smith. She survives the reverse bear trap in the first movie, which takes place in May of 2005. And for her, Jigsaw isn't a killer. He's the guy who saved her from her heroin addiction.
He gave her a purpose, a father figure. But her journey is all about her gradual corruption. She starts out fully believing in John's work, that his games are a form of forced rehabilitation. But by the time we get to Saw the Third, she's completely lost faith in his core philosophy.
She becomes convinced that people can't really change.
And that is the one thing you can't believe if you're working for Jigsaw. Because if the game is about rehabilitation, the victim has to have a chance to win. If the game is inescapable, then it's not a test anymore.
It's just murder.
Precisely. And that's what Amanda starts designing. The angel trap that kills Detective Carey, Troy's classroom trap, they were built to be impossible. She was turning into a straightforward serial killer, and that's something John couldn't accept.
And this is where the 2023 prequel, Saw X, fits in so perfectly and really fleshes out her character.
It does. Saw X is set very specifically between the events of Saw I and Saw II, so early 2006.
And this placement was completely intentional, right? It was meant to show Amanda at her peak.
Exactly. It shows her when she's still the loyal, effective apprentice, totally under John's influence. They're in Mexico City getting revenge on the cancer scammers. She's a faithful partner. And because this is before her big philosophical break, she survives the movie, which leads directly into Saw II, and then ultimately her death in Saw the Third in October 2006.
So if Amanda is the failed philosophical apprentice, then Detective Mark Hoffman is the cold, tactical one.
Hoffman is revealed in Saw the Fee as the second major apprentice. And unlike Amanda, who had this deep emotional connection to John, Hoffman was just cold.
Yeah.
Strategic. He was reluctantly paired with Amanda, who openly doubted he could even build traps properly. She saw him as just the muscle, the heavy lifting.
It's such an interesting power dynamic within the Jigsaw cult, the true believer versus the reluctant enforcer. And Hoffman's takeover after Kramer's death was all part of the plan.
Oh, completely. Even in death, Kramer was pulling Hoffman's strings, that wax-coated tape from his stomach. It had instructions for his ex-wife, Jill Tuck.
Yeah.
That's Hoffman. John knew Hoffman was a killer at heart, and that he'd eventually abuse the Jigsaw name.
But the sources also explain why John had so much control over him. It was pure blackmail.
Yeah. John knew that Amanda had a role in Jill's miscarriage. It was this devastating piece of information he used to control both Amanda and Hoffman to make them stick to his posthumous plans.
And Hoffman's rampage, just killing everyone who could identify him, leads to his end in Saw 3D. And he's taken down by the ultimate surprise apprentice,
Dr. Lawrence Gordon.
the survivor from the original bathroom trap. It's revealed he was recruited by John right after he escaped. He became this unseen master operative, using his medical skills to help clean up Jigsaw's messes.
And that ending of Saw 3D is so perfect because it brings everything full circle. Gordon chains Hoffman up in that original disgusting bathroom, throws away the hacksaw.
The same hacksaw he used to cut off his own foot?
And delivers that final, echoing, game over.
Yeah.
The first victim becomes the final judge. It's brilliant.
But this whole complex web of apprentices is only possible because of the franchise's dedication to that non-linear narrative. This is the real signature of Saw, and it's also the most confusing thing for casual viewers.
It's incredibly fragmented.
Yeah.
You have to think of the films less like sequels and more like overlapping chapters in one big time-jumping story. Saw 2 was the film that really set that template.
The huge twist in Saw Sessig is all about tricking Detective Eric Matthews. He's watching this video feed thinking his son and all these other victims are being tested in the nerve gas house right now, in real time.
While John Kramer is sitting calmly right in front of him. But the genius of it is that the events in the nerve gas house had already happened. That was pre-recorded footage.
Which allowed John to manipulate the whole police investigation while his son was actually safe the whole time, locked in a vault. It's a psychological game played against the authorities, and it plays with the audience's expectations.
And the timeline just keeps overlapping. Saw 3 and Saw 4 happened at the exact same time, October 2006.
So wait, you're watching two different movies that are taking place simultaneously.
Think of it like a split screen. Saw 3 is the A story. You're watching John Kramer slowly die. Amanda's final test fails. They both die. Saw 4 is the B story, happening at the same time, following Officer Rigg as he goes through a new set of games run by Hoffman.
And both films end at basically the same moment, with John and Amanda dead and Hoffman finding their bodies.
Which allows him to seamlessly take over the Jigsaw mantle in Saw V. They chose that structure specifically to keep Tobin Bell in the movies. Since John had to die for the story to move on, making Ivy concurrent allowed him to still be a major presence through flashbacks and active manipulation.
And they even used that same trick again for the revival Jigsaw in 2017.
They did. That film had two parallel games, one in the present of 2016 and one that's revealed through a flashback to have happened a decade earlier in May 2005.
And that earlier game revealed John's first ever apprentice, Logan Nelson. Now, adding him so late in the game felt a little weird to a lot of people.
It was a bit of a retcon for sure. But the lore is that Logan, a doctor, accidentally mixed up John's x-rays years earlier, delaying his cancer diagnosis. Jigsaw decided it was an honest mistake, saved him from a trap, and recruited him. So Logan was established as the guy who helped John build the very first traps way back when.
So you have the philosophical apprentice, Amanda, the tactical enforcer, Hoffman, the secret cleanup man, Gordon, and the original engineer, Logan. It's a succession crisis inside a riddle, all wrapped up in this brilliantly confusing timeline.
That really intricate serialization, I mean, as much as the die-hard fans loved it, it did eventually start to wear thin at the box office. By the time Saw 6 came out, the franchise was starting to struggle.
Creatively and financially. The reviews were not great, and the formula was starting to feel a little stale.
So much so that after Saw VI, which they didn't even screen for critics, which is never a good sign, Saw 3D in 2010, was officially marketed as the final chapter.
Right. The budget had crept up to about $17 million, but the ticket sales, at least domestically, were dropping. It was time to put it to bed.
But, you know, money talks. And a profitable IP is never truly dead. So after a 7-year break, which is an eternity for a horror franchise, they tried to bring it back with Jigsaw in 2017.
And they were desperately looking for a new angle. The sources say the writers, Josh Stolberg and Peter Goldfinger, they pitched all these wild ideas to shake things up. One was set on an oil derrick in the middle of the ocean.
Which Lionsgate did not go for that.
No. They ended up going back to what they knew, the time shift storyline. But they used a new setting, the barn, and created that new apprentice, Logan Nelson, through the flashback. The whole goal of Jigsaw was to make a dead character relevant a decade after he died.
The problem was it felt less like a natural story and more like mechanical retconning. And even though it made over $100 million worldwide, the reviews were bad, and its opening weekend was the second weakest in the whole franchise, just in terms of tickets sold. The magic just wasn't there.
So after the traditional revival didn't really work, they pivoted again, this time a complete tonal shift and a spin-off, Spiral, from the Book of Saw.
Which came out in 2021. And this was a big deal, mostly because it was driven by Chris Rock. He was a fan, he wanted to do a horror movie, and he pitched this idea himself.
And the key difference with Spiral was its focus, right? It was basically a police procedural. It centered on Detective Zeke Banks, played by Rock, hunting a copycat killer.
William Shank. And his targets weren't just random people who didn't appreciate their lives. He was targeting corrupt cops. He was trying to cleanse the police department. It was a clear move towards social commentary.
So they deliberately tried to separate it from the main Jigsaw story. They wanted to create a new, distinct identity.
They were trying to launch a whole new parallel universe, kind of like what the original Saw did all those years ago.
Which meant they had to make some huge changes visually and auditorily to really drive that separation home. So they retired Billy the Puppet.
And replaced him with this new, kind of creepy but way less charming puppet called Mr. Snuggles. It was a very clear break from tradition.
And more than that, they made a conscious choice not to use Tobin Bell's voice for the killer.
Which was huge. The producers knew that Tobin Bell's voice is Jigsaw. So instead, they used this computer-generated, heavily processed voice. The idea was to make it clear. This is a new killer, new motive, new identity.
But even with all that star power, Chris Rock, Samuel L. Jackson's Spiral was the lowest grossing movie in the entire franchise. It only made about $40 million worldwide.
Yeah, the audience reaction was pretty clear. They just weren't interested in a Jigsaw-adjacent story if John Kramer wasn't in it.
So that box office reality forced them to make an immediate retreat. The experiments failed.
They realized that John Kramer, the character, the philosophy, he was the central pillar, not just the idea of death traps or copycats. which leads them directly to the big comeback.
Saw X in 2023.
And Saw X was just a masterstroke of marketing and story strategy.
Yeah.
I said it way early in the timeline, between Saw I and Saw 2, when John Kramer was still alive, fully mobile, and at his most philosophically pure, with a loyal Amanda at his side.
The film also doubled down on his personal motive. This was about revenge. Revenge against the people who scammed him with a fake cancer cure.
By making John the protagonist, the victim, instead of just the antagonist, they let Tobin Bell be the absolute center of the movie, emotionally and physically. And the result was great reviews and a great box office. It had stronger legs, as they say, than the last few movies. It just proved that the original mythology was still incredibly vital.
So you can see the pattern. When the sequels get old, they experiment. When the experiments fail, they go right back to the one thing that always works.
John Kramer, in the past, alive and well. #the future landscape and enduring legacy.
So after the huge success of Saw X, you'd think the path forward would be pretty clear. But, I mean, the history of this franchise tells us it's never that simple. The drama behind the scenes has always been as intense as what's on screen.
And that volatility popped up immediately. Saw X Size was announced right away. The plan was for it to be a direct continuation, picking up literally 30 seconds after Saw X ended.
Right, featuring the return of that final villain, Cecilia Peterson, and of course, Mark Hoffman, who showed up in that big mid-credit scene.
But that project just stalled out fast. The sources say development got bogged down by major creative differences and, frankly, producer burnout. Mark Berg and Oren Cools, the guys who had guided this thing for 20 years, were apparently colliding over where to go next.
Cools specifically said he was just burned out and wanted to step back from the constant pressure of having to reinvent the series over and over again.
And that creative deadlock led to the biggest shift in the franchise's history since the very beginning. In June of 2025, Blumhouse Productions acquired Twisted Pictures' stake in the franchise.
With Lionsgate still involved, of course.
Right. But the Blumhouse acquisition signals a massive creative renewal. James Wan, the original co-creator and director, is confirmed to be creatively involved with the movies for the first time since Saw 3.
That's huge news.
It is. Jason Blum said he specifically wants Wan's vision back to guide the series forward and to maybe finally move beyond just doing prequels.
And crucially, proving how essential he is, Tobin Bell is confirmed to be coming back again. Despite all the chronological gymnastics, they're still not done with him.
Bell himself has even teased that John Kramer isn't done yet, which implies there are still gaps in the history or parts of his philosophy we haven't seen.
The sheer longevity of Jigsaw's world is just a testament to how strong that original idea was, and it goes way beyond just the movies now. It's a whole transmedia empire.
It really is a whole ecosystem.
Yeah.
You have the video games like Saw, the video game, and Saw 2, Flesh and Blood. And those often told non-canonical stories, which let the creators just play around in the sandbox without messing up the main film timeline.
For instance, the first game picks up right after the first movie and says that Detective Tapp actually survived getting shot.
Yeah, he's put in an insane asylum and forced to go through more of Jigsaw's tests. It lets him do these fun what-if scenarios, like having Amanda Young show up as a victim before the movies revealed she was an accomplice. It just shows how broad the appeal of the mythology is.
And the franchise's cultural stamp is cemented in real-world attractions. We're not talking about, simple movie-themed tours. We're talking about intense physical experiences.
Like the Saw the Ride at Thorpe Park in the UK. It's a roller coaster with a beyond vertical drop and those spinning saw blades everywhere.
Plus, the officially licensed escape rooms, like the Saw Escape in Las Vegas, you can actually go through rooms designed to look like the bathroom or the Gideon meatpacking plant and try to solve the puzzles.
The fact that people want to physically experience these places proves they're invested not just in the character, but in the entire concept of the games.
So if we take a step back and look at this whole billion-dollar picture, what does this deep dive into the Jigsaw legacy really tell us?
It tells us that the Saw franchise might be the best modern example of how one singular low-budget idea, the ethical puzzle of the bathroom game, can be spun out into this self-sustaining complex mythology.
And it survived its own contradictions and the changing market because of two main things. First, that clever, constant use of the non-linear timeline that kept its dead main character alive and central.
And second, a real willingness to adapt when things weren't working.
When the sequels got stale, they tried a total reboot with Jigsaw and a tonal spin-off with Spiral. When those didn't land, they knew the only way to win was to go back, completely and unapologetically, to the original master.
And the success of Saw X proved it. John Kramer died back in 2006 and Saw the Third, But the franchise's entire ability to function economically and creatively depends entirely on his character and his ideology. The second the story strays from him, the audience checks out. He has to keep coming back through prequels, flashbacks, posthumous plans to get the series back on track.
Which brings us to a final provocative thought for you, the learner, to consider as we wrap up here. If Jigsaw's whole philosophy is about forcing people to change, to evolve, to appreciate their lives, what does it say about the franchise itself, and maybe even the larger horror genre, that the only way it can evolve and stay profitable is by constantly going back to the one singular master who created its original purpose? What happens to the game when all the apprentices and all the copycats inevitably fail, and the only one left standing is the master himself, the ultimate essential piece of the puzzle?